Let's rewind to the summer of 2019. Picture the scene. The President of the United States is on Air Force One, scrolling through maps, and he has a thought. A big, simple real estate developer's thought. He looks at this giant frozen island called Greenland, and he thinks, how much? So he picks up the phone, calls the Prime Minister of Denmark and asks. Just like that. The world predictably lost its mind. Late-night hosts wrote monologues. Newspapers ran headlines dripping with sarcasm. Denmark, politely but firmly, said the idea was absurd. It was the ultimate meme, proof that politics had jumped the shark. But here's what everyone laughing at the punchline missed. They were watching a magic trick and only looking at the magician's smile, not his hands. Because Donald Trump wasn't the first American president to want Greenland. He wasn't even the second, he was the third. For more than a century, in the quiet, wood-paneled offices of the State Department and the Pentagon, men with very serious faces have been staring at maps of the Arctic and circling Greenland. They weren't thinking about golf courses. They were thinking about war, about minerals, about controlling the future. In 2019, the delivery was clumsy, a tweet where a diplomatic cable should have been. But the instinct, the cold, calculating geopolitics behind it, was not new. It was an old American habit, wearing a new red hat. This is the story of that habit. It's the story of why a frozen rock with more glaciers than people has been a silent obsession in Washington for 150 years. Welcome to the biggest real estate deal that never happened, and the reason it might just happen yet. To understand the present, you have to start in the past, in an age when empires bought land like we buy apps. The year is 1867. The United States has just bought Alaska from Russia. The man who brokered the deal, Secretary of State William Seward, is being mocked. They call it Seward's Folly, a frozen wasteland. But Seward isn't laughing. He's looking north, beyond Alaska. He commissions secret studies on acquiring Greenland and Iceland. His logic is the logic of every empire: control the choke points. He sees the North Atlantic not as an empty ocean, but as a chessboard. Greenland is the queen, positioned to dominate the entire board. The idea gets shelved, but the seed is planted. America now has a taste for Arctic real estate. Fast forward 8 decades. The year is 1946. World War II is over. A new, even scarier enemy has emerged: the Soviet Union. President Harry Truman has a problem. Military planners are panicking about the bomber gap. The next war, they fear, will be fought in the sky, with nuclear bombers flying over the top of the world. And guess what sits directly between Moscow and New York? Greenland. It's the perfect interception point, an unsinkable aircraft carrier made of rock and ice. So Truman makes an offer. A formal, serious White House offer. $100 million. Not in cash, but in solid gold bullion. He's essentially trying to buy a shield for America's front door. Denmark says no. But America doesn't give up. If you can't buy the house, you rent the guest room. Forever. In 1951, they sign a defense treaty that gives the US permanent military access. The base they build, Thule Air Base, is still there today, one of the most strategically sensitive pieces of American dirt on the planet. So when the 2019 headlines hit, the generals and the spooks in the Pentagon weren't laughing. They were nodding. They'd seen this movie before. They knew the script. Now, let's put on an admiral's hat and look at the map the way the Pentagon sees it. Forget the flat classroom version. Spin a globe. See that space between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom? That's called the GIUK Gap. It sounds technical, but it's perhaps the most important naval choke point you've never heard of. Think of it as the front door to the Atlantic Ocean. For Russian submarines lurking in their Arctic bases, this is the hallway they have to sneak down if they want to threaten American coastlines. And for the last 70 years, NATO has turned this hallway into a trap. It's lined with underwater microphones on the sea floor, secret sensors, patrol planes, and satellites. It's a kill zone. Greenland is the western wall of that trap. Control Greenland, and you control the door. Now, imagine a future where that door isn't so secure. Imagine if a country with a lot of money and very different interests, say China, started investing heavily in Greenland, building commercial ports that could double as naval bases, upgrading civilian airfields that could host military jets. Suddenly, the door has a second lock, and Washington doesn't have the key. This is the nightmare scenario. Because in military strategy, distance is everything. More distance means more warning time. Greenland cuts the distance in half. A missile flying from Moscow to DC travels over 5,000 miles. From northern Greenland to Moscow, barely 2,000. That difference isn't just geography, it's the difference between having 30 minutes to respond and having 10. That's why the US treats Thule Air Base not as a rental but as a crown jewel. It's home to giant radars that stare into space watching for missiles. It's a node for controlling spy satellites. If America owned Greenland outright, all the diplomatic friction about upgrading these systems, about deploying new troops or weapons, vanishes. It becomes American soil. A permanent, hardened fortress in the high north. In a world that's getting more dangerous by the day, that kind of certainty is worth more than gold. Okay, so it's a strategic fortress. But let's be honest, Trump is a businessman. And every businessman wants to know, what's the asset? What's the return on investment? For Greenland, the answer is buried under the ice. It's not oil or gas, it's some. Anything more important to the 21st century, rare earth elements. That's a bad name. They're not rare. They're just brutally difficult to get out of the ground and turn into something useful. But your modern life depends on them. The powerful magnet in your smartphone? Rare earths. The motor in your electric car? Rare earths. The guidance system in a cruise missile? Absolutely packed with rare earths. And here's the problem. China controls about 90% of the global supply. They don't just mine them, they control the whole complex toxic refining process. It's a monopoly. And in a world of tech cold wars, a monopoly on the materials of the future is a weapon. Greenland is one of the few places on Earth with enough of these materials to maybe, just maybe, break that monopoly. There's a site in the south called Kvanefjeld. Geologists believe it's one of the largest untapped treasure troves of rare earths outside China. We're talking about millions of tons. For Washington, this isn't just a mine, it's a Greenland battery, the power source for the next generation of everything, clean energy, advanced weapons, you name it. But while American politicians were making jokes about buying the whole island, Chinese companies were moving. A Chinese mining firm quietly acquired a major stake in the company that holds the rights to that very Kvanefjeld deposit. Think about that. While the world was laughing at the idea of an American purchase, China was executing a targeted strategic investment to control the prize itself. So, the American interest isn't just about keeping others out, it's about getting in. It's about ensuring that the raw materials that will build the future aren't all funneled through a single, rival superpower. When strategists in DC look at Greenland's ice, they don't just see a frozen shield, they see a battery, and the plug is currently shaped like a Chinese yuan symbol. If all this sounds like a dry game of Risk, let me tell you a ghost story, a true one. In 1959, the US Army showed up in Greenland with a great cover story. They told the Danes they were building a peaceful scientific research station to study the ice cap. What they actually built was a secret city under the glaciers. They called it Camp Century. It had houses, a hospital, a nuclear reactor for power, a whole community buried in the snow. But the science was a facade. The real project had a colder name, Project Iceworm. The plan was utterly wild. The US military wanted to carve thousands of miles of tunnels under the ice, a hidden subway system for nuclear missiles. The idea was to create a moving target, a maze where hundreds of warheads could be shuttled around, invisible to Soviet spies. It was the ultimate hidden ace. There was just one flaw in this Bond villain scheme. They forgot that ice moves. It flows, it creeps, it crushes. The tunnels started to warp and collapse. The whole project became a maintenance nightmare. By the mid-60s, they gave up. They packed up the nuclear reactor and left. But they left everything else behind. Tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, toxic chemicals, sewage, and low-level radioactive waste. All buried, assuming the ice would be a permanent freezer. That assumption is now in question. As the planet warms, that ghost base, that monument to Cold War paranoia, is starting to stir. Scientists warn that the waste could begin to seep out as the ice melts, a toxic time bomb set by the past. Camp Century is the perfect symbol of America's relationship with Greenland. It's a history of grand ambition and secret deals, of brilliant strategy and messy consequences. It shows that when great powers look at a map, they don't see a home for people. They see a piece on a board to be used, even buried, in the pursuit of an edge. And sometimes, what you bury doesn't stay buried. Now let's talk about the force that's changing every single calculation: climate change. This is the dark, ironic twist. The very thing that's a catastrophe for our planet is, from a cold, strategic viewpoint, unlocking a gold mine. For all of human history, the Arctic Ocean has been a frozen wall, a dead end. To ship goods from Asia to Europe, you had to go the long way around, through pirate-infested straits, crowded canals, and tropical storms. But as the ice retreats, that wall is melting into a highway. New routes are opening up that could slash shipping times by weeks. The most developed is Russia's northern sea route, a path along the Siberian coast. Russia isn't just watching it thaw, they're building a toll booth. They're demanding fees, requiring Russian icebreaker escorts, and militarizing the coastline with new bases. They see it as their sovereign domain. But there are other paths on the drawing board, routes that cut right past Greenland's doorstep. This is where China's vision comes in. They call it the Polar Silk Road. They see the melting Arctic not as an environmental emergency, but as a business opportunity, a way to get their goods to market faster and bypass vulnerable choke points like the Strait of Hormuz or the Suez Canal. And here's Greenland's problem. It sits right next to these new ocean highways, but it has almost none of the infrastructure needed to support them. No deep-water ports for container ships to refuel. No major repair yards, no search and rescue fleets for when a ship hits an iceberg. It's like owning land next to a new interstate, but you don't have a gas station, a diner, or even an on-ramp. This creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Geopolitics loves one. Whoever steps in to build that infrastructure, the ports, the docks, the logistics hubs, doesn't just make money. They gain influence, they set the rules, they become the landlord of the new global trade route. So when the ice melts, it's not just revealing rock and water, it's revealing a new board for the oldest game in the world, who gets to control the flow of money and power. And Greenland is holding the most valuable square. So if an outright purchase is a diplomatic nightmare, what's the real play? It's more subtle, and in many ways more clever. It's what you might call the independence trap. Here's the reality on the ground in Greenland. The people there have their own language, their own parliament, their own flag. Polls show a strong majority want full independence from Denmark. But there's a catch, a very expensive catch. Every year, Denmark sends Greenland a check for about $600 million. That money pays for schools, hospitals, and basic services. It's a lifeline. Independence means cutting that lifeline. And Greenland's tiny economy of 56,000 people can't currently replace it. So the dream of sovereignty is trapped by simple math. This is where the long game begins. Both Washington and Beijing see this not as a barrier, but as a door. The strategy shifts from buy the land to become the new patron. It's a race to position yourself as the natural partner for when, not if, Greenland finally goes its own way. We're already seeing the opening moves. The US reopened its consulate in Greenland's capital. It's offering modest aid packages for business development. The message is quiet but clear. We see you as your own future nation. We're here to help you stand on your own feet. Meanwhile, China is circling with a much bigger checkbook. They specialize in offering huge, no-questions-asked loans for airports, ports, and roads, deals that are very hard for a cash-strapped government to refuse. We've seen this movie before. In Sri Lanka and Africa, the debt gets too big, and suddenly the lender has a say in who uses the port or where the military ships can dock. So the real question isn't whether someone will buy Greenland. The question is who will buy Greenland's future. Will it be the United States, offering a security partnership with strings attached to Western ideals? Or will it be China, offering easy money with strings that could slowly pull Greenland into a new sphere of influence? The trap is set. The only thing left is to see who Greenland walks towards when it decides to leave its old home. But while the superpowers play chess, let's remember the people who actually live on the board. This is the part that often gets lost in the maps and the money. For the Inuit people of Greenland, this isn't a geopolitical game. It's their life, caught in a painful squeeze between a vanishing past and an uncertain future. The trauma runs deep. In the 1950s, Denmark took Inuit children from their families in a failed attempt to assimilate them, fracturing culture and trust. Today, Greenland has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, a silent epidemic born from isolation, long dark winters, and the dizzying speed of change. And then there's the ice, their ancient ally now betraying them. Hunters who have navigated by the frozen sea for generations watch as the ice forms later and melts earlier. Their way of life tied to the seal and the sled dog is collapsing. In some settlements, hunters have had to make the heartbreaking choice to put down their dog teams because they can no longer safely hunt to feed them. These dogs aren't just pets, they're a living library of Arctic survival, a bond with history that's being broken. So when politicians in Washington, Copenhagen, or Beijing talk about ports, minerals, and missile defense, they're talking about abstract prizes. For the people of Greenland, the stakes are visceral: cultural survival, mental health, and the basic ability to provide for a family in a landscape that is transforming faster than anyone can adapt. They aren't just a population to be administered or a workforce to be mined, they are a nation standing on the front line of climate change, watching the world's giants argue over who gets to own the ground beneath their feet as it literally melts away. This brings us to today, to the edge of where speculation becomes headlines. The mood has shifted. The memes of 2019 are gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. In early 2026, the rhetoric from Washington turned serious. Officials didn't just muse about a purchase, they stated that all options, including the use of military tools, were on the table to secure American interests in Greenland. Let's be clear, this isn't an invasion fleet sailing north, but it is a seismic shift in tone. It's moving the idea from the real estate section to the national security briefing. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Denmark, a loyal NATO ally for over 70 years, was shocked and angry. European capitals issued stern warnings about respecting sovereignty. The message was unified. Threatening an ally's territory shatters the very trust the alliance is built on. It's a paradox. To protect NATO's northern flank, the US is willing to undermine the alliance's core principle that an attack on one is an attack on all, by hinting at an attack on one of its own. This escalation changes everything. It transforms Greenland from a strategic asset into a potential flashpoint. It tells every small nation that even a formal alliance with a superpower is no guarantee if you sit on something they decide they need. The diplomatic gloves are off. We've moved from a conversation about money to a conversation about power, coercion, and precedent. The 2026 brink isn't about troops on beak. It's about a fundamental question. In a world of renewed great power competition, are the old rules of diplomacy and alliance still binding, or are we entering an era where might makes right and geography is destiny, to be taken by any means necessary? The ice isn't the only thing that's becoming less stable. So, why does the United States want Greenland? It's the wrong question. The real question is, what does the melting Arctic reveal about us? It acts as a giant white mirror, and what it reflects isn't pretty. It shows that for all our talk of a rules-based order, the ancient instincts of empire and acquisition are still there, just under the surface. For America, Greenland is the ultimate shield against a scary new world. For China, it's a critical battery for economic dominance. For Denmark, it's a difficult responsibility. And for the people of Greenland, it's home, a home caught in a storm of greed and geopolitics they didn't create. The ice is pulling back to unveil the most contested frontier of the 21st century, a place of unimaginable mineral wealth, vital shipping lanes, and crucial military advantage. The scramble for it is the defining story of our age, a story of climate change unlocking ancient appetites. The ultimate tragedy is that the very phenomenon that should unite humanity in a fight for survival, the warming of our planet, is instead dividing us into a ruthless race for the spoils. The fate of Greenland will answer a final, profound question. Will the Arctic become a zone of cooperation, governed by international law and scientific partnership? Or will it become a new Wild West, a lawless arena where the strong seize what they want and the dreams of small nations are just collateral damage? The ice is melting. And as it disappears, it's not just revealing land, it's revealing what we're made of. Thanks for watching. If you think the fight over a frozen island is intense, wait until you see what's starting to happen on the moon. The new frontier is already here. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious.